let's take a look at this. So Ezekiel 38, you already mentioned it. With the decline of America, you brought it up. So let's play out how Ezekiel 38 unfolds, where you see it, pre-tribulation. How do you put things together?
Right. And I'm hoping, Tom, because of all the work you've done and I've done in the past, and that the viewers are really pretty familiar with Ezekiel 38, because we're going to just do a summary of it. 52 passages between Ezekiel 38 and 39, very descriptive, tells you everything that's going to happen, who's invading, why they're invading, how they're stopped, how the cleanup goes in the aftermath. Incredible details that are very clear. And so we'll just tell you in a nutshell what's going to happen is Russia's going to put together a coalition of an outer circle, outer ring of countries. None of them were in the Psalm 83 circle we talked about. And you've got Russia and Turkey and Iran and some of the North African countries. Some people say maybe Libya, Kush, Sudan, Somalia, maybe even Morocco and Tunisia, and then some of the breakaway southern Soviet Union republics of the southern steppes of Russia. This is a general consensus of who's involved coming against Israel. Most of them are Muslim, by the way, except Russia. So they'd be coming against Israel not to take over the land, which was the motto of Psalm 83, take the pastures of God for a possession, but to take over Israel's plunder and booty. And they do it at a time, we're told in Ezekiel 38, 7 through 13, when Israel is brought back from the sword, persecution, into the land from the nations, dwelling securely, without walls, bars, nor gates, in the midst of the land, with a lot of gold, plunder, and livestock and agriculture and goods, because that's what Russia's coming after. So I say to people, one, I think it's pre-tribulation, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Mm-hmm. But two, I don't think it's quite ready to happen yet, because Israel's not dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. They have been returning from the land, so some of these conditions have been fulfilled. But they've got enemies around them. They've got a wall to the north, 2 walls in Lebanon. They've got a wall separating Jordan at certain parts, a wall to the south by the Sinai in Egypt. They've got walls around the Gaza. They got a partition wall that goes 403 miles down Israel proper to keep Palestinian terror out. Some points that's 20 feet high, filled with concrete. So I don't think they're dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates, and they got checkpoints throughout. However, after they take out their Arab enemies around them, those walls will no longer be necessary, and I do believe they would come down. We saw how quick the Berlin Wall came down back at the end of the Cold War. So, but what happens is God stops that invasion. And not America, that's what we're talking about, we're probably protesting, not Israel, it's too formidable. He does it with fire, hailstone, and brimstone, great hailstone. And it'll be clear God stopped it. And imagine the viewers watching that on TV when they see these troops coming from the uttermost parts of the north, massive hordes coming, speaking different languages. And there's a great earthquake, and all of a sudden it says every man's sword will be against his brother. In other words, they don't speak the same language, so what's going on? They're killing. It's like an Old Testament thing that happened to the Midianites, right? And so then they're coming down, and there's fire coming down, great hailstone, and they're just stopped in their tracks. And God says in Ezekiel 39:7, after that, I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anyone. I'm the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Requires 2 things. My people Israel, they couldn't have got killed out in the Holocaust. They had to be existence for this prophecy. And 2, the Holy One in Israel means there has to be a land of Israel. Can't be taken away by the Psalm 83 countries and that sort of thing. Those 2 things will be in place when Ezekiel 38 happens. And then what happens after that, where we'll get into why it's pre-trib, is because they're burning the weapons for 7 years. Now, some people like Ron Rhodes, Fruchtenbaum, Dr. Ron Fruchtenbaum, myself, would say, let's play that out. Maybe that makes it pre-trib. Mm-hmm. They could burn weapons for 3.5 years before the tribulation. They could burn weapons 3.5 years in the first half of the tribulation because Israel's living in a pseudo-peace. They could burn those weapons. But at the midpoint of the tribulation, Jesus even says that's when the abomination of desolation happens. Flee to the mountains. He does not say grab some weapons and start burning them for more campfires. So I don't believe the Jewish people are going to have the luxury of burning weapons for fuel or whatever that's going to be in that last half of the tribulation. They would probably be grabbing those weapons to defend themselves. So the first 3.5 years prior to the tribulation, I believe it probably concludes Ezekiel 38. They start burning the weapons for 3.5 years. On into the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, they may have 8, 9, or 10 years worth of weapons, but at the midpoint of the trib, they got to stop because they got to flee for their lives. So I think that's one of the arguments for being pre-tribulation.
Mm-hmm. I've looked at it. I've gone back and forth on the exact timing of it. I don't know, but I cannot imagine the weapons being burned into the millennial kingdom. That's always been a challenge for me. Something else is fascinating as you watch all of this. There is an oil pipeline that Iran helped Israel build. I don't know if you're aware of it. It goes from Eilat and it goes up through the Negev in Israel. It goes all the way up to, I believe it's Ashdod. It's either Ashdod or Ashkelon, there through Gaza and onto a port. And it looks like Israel's about ready to make a deal on that if they haven't done it already, and to be able to transport oil. Now, this is fascinating to me, Bill, because Iran helped Israel build that 60 years ago. And now you look at the dynamics with Iran and Israel, and it's just so fascinating how God works. But part of Ezekiel 38 is the plunder. Russia, Gog, along with Persia, Magog, along with Persia and Togarmah and the other territories. And you have Saudi Arabia protesting, or the protesters saying, have you come to take great plunder? Have you come to take booty? What are you doing? What's really going on here? So I look at this. We know the gas finds are out there in Israel off the Mediterranean coast. And now we have this oil pipeline of all things Iran helps Israel build, along with other proposals that are out there right now. And this would cause Israel to just be a booming small nation. And I look and go, it's really amazing to live the days we do.
Well, it does. You mentioned earlier, it's a greater, safer, wealthier Israel that Russia's coming after, that I think is en route. I think it'll be some of those natural gas discoveries in the oil. They'll probably find oil over there. The Hebrew word for coming for the spoil is shalal, and it means spoil. You're taking spoil from the death spoiler. So in other words, Israel may have also taken some spoil from their accomplishments of taking out their Arab enemies around them. Some people who think Ezekiel 38 happens in the beginning of the tribulation do so because they think it's the false covenant that gets confirmed that creates that sense of peace. Because it says there'll be a peaceful people dwelling securely without walls, bars, or gates. I would say that I don't believe the false covenant has anything really to do with the politically brokered peace deal. I think Israel achieves peace militarily, as we talked about in the first section. The Israeli Defense Forces take their enemies to task and win wars and expand territorially. But, that is why some people would say it starts into the tribulation, and they could be right, but I think we're going to talk about the false covenant and what probably the true content of the false covenant is, and it may have nothing to do with this Arab-Israeli conflict.
Yeah.